Everyone here has come from somewhere else. As a matter of fact, in 1776, there were 300,000 indigenous people in this area from here down to Monterey. Within 10 years of the Spanish coming and populating this area, that population went down to less than 50,000 people. And so the people who are here now, like me and like so many of you and so many of us, came from someplace else, which is exactly how James Close got here. James Close came here from Toronto, Canada, believe it or not. Now, how did he know to come to Danville? To be honest with you, we don't know. But he did. He came to Danville, and he did not come necessarily for the gold rush. He wasn't up mining, but he came here with $1,100 in gold coin. And when he got here, in 1875, he purchased from Dan Inman. Dan Inman and his brother were part of the gold rush and mining. They got here in 1858 and bought 400 acres, and Dan Inman and his brother actually founded the town of Danville. James got here later and paid Dan Inman $1,100 in gold coin for a blacksmith shop, a small building, and a house. And where it was is, if you're familiar with Danville, do you know where Prospect Street is? And there's a chocolate shop on the corner, and there's a restaurant on the other side, and there's the Bevmo on Diablo Road. That is the land that James Close purchased for $1,100. James bought his blacksmith shop, and James became a blacksmith himself. He tore down that initial blacksmith shop and built another one. And then he built a two-story building next to that. And then he built finally a 10-room house on Diablo Road where Bevmo is now. So James got here 2 years later. He married a woman, Lillian Ramage, who had moved here with her family from Illinois. So they married and had two children, a young boy by the name of Clarence, but there was a twin daughter as well. And we didn't know about this for a long time until we started doing this tour. And you can see right here, there's a small gravesite right here. It says Estella. Here's what's fascinating. James, of course, knew, because he was his business relied upon the farmers here. He shoed all their horses. He actually had a building next door, and a man in that building sold farm equipment. And so it was very important for him to make sure that the farmers stayed prosperous. And remember when Miss Charlotte talked about the Grange? The Grange building still exists, and you're not going to believe it, but it's not the one over here that you're thinking about on Diablo. The original Grange was on Front Street, and it's now part of what we know as the Village Theater. So when that building was actually built and remodeled, they decided to keep the Grange building, and they simply raised it up and built underneath it. But James and many other people, including Miss Charlotte's father, the Woods, were members of the Grange. The Grange was everything that she talked about. It was a social group, but also it was a business group, and it was a political group. Well, at this time, farming was enormous around here. There were ranches, there were sheep, there was a lot of wheat being grown. There was enormous poultry farms here. As a matter of fact, it's almost half, what we're told, almost 50% of the eggs that were consumed in San Francisco came from the San Ramon Valley. Problem is, How did you get them there? Back then, we now know the boulevard. There's San Ramon Valley Boulevard, there's Harts Avenue, there's Danville Boulevard. For some of you who have maybe been around for a while, that was old Highway 21. Well, back in the day, that was a dirt road. There was a road that went out to where Miss Charlotte lived, out Tassajara and Sycamore. That was a dirt road. There were dirt roads through Alamo. But to get all this produce, to get these eggs, to get the hay out of the valley so that there was a market for it, they had to take these dirt roads, basically from San Ramon all the way to Martinez. Well, think about it. In the summer, the dirt road was dusty, full of ruts. In the winter, especially in the fall during harvest, it was mud. And so they were taking all of this produce, all of these farm things that they were growing, trying to get them to Martinez, and they could only do it by horse drawn wagons. Can you imagine? And so the growth was stymied by that. And by the time it got to Martinez, then it would get on a ferry and either go to San Francisco or make its way up to Sacramento and then further. So the Grange got together and started working with politicians, because we were a state by then, and also petitioning the Southern Pacific Railroad to bring a branch line from Martinez down through the San Ramon Valley. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was a game changer. So they finally convinced Southern Pacific to do it. Southern Pacific did not want to do it. They did not think it would be profitable, but they were finally said, okay, we will bring the railroad branch line through here. It will go from Martinez through Walnut Creek, through Alamo to Danville, actually then to what was Limerick or now San Ramon. There was going to be a turntable there, and the train would go back. They said, however, we will not purchase the land for the right of way. So you're going to have to get together, and the Grange is going to have to convince the farmers on the route to donate the land for the right of way, which we now know of as what? The Iron Horse Trail. So they did. They said, however, Southern Pacific said, we will buy some land on which to put our stations. And so they purchased 8 acres in Danville from a gentleman who owned a farm here in Danville. His name was John Harts, Harts Avenue. So they purchased those 8 acres, and do you know where the museum is now? The museum used to sit where Lenardi's is, but that was still the same 8 acres that the original depot was built. The depot is built. John Harts has this farm that went up the Las Trampas Hills and then east all the way well to what is now Harts Avenue, but it divided his farm in half and really made it not really profitable to farm there anymore. So what did he do? He subdivided the land between Railroad Avenue and what is now Harts and sold lots. And people came in and started buying those lots and building homes, and slowly but surely that became downtown Danville. Well, once the railroad came through, now all these crops, all these eggs, and could be put on a train and sent north. Also, it meant that other crops could be grown here. So pears could be grown here. So corn could be grown here. Wheat could be grown here. Walnuts could be grown here. And all of that could now have a market much larger than it ever really was. So that, the Woods family, James Close and his family, the Grange, were total game changers for the town of Danville, for the San Ramon Valley, actually, and they all came from someplace else. James son, Clarence, who was born at the same time as Stella, did live. He married then a woman from Walnut Creek. They inherited the Close family property, and Clarence and his wife, Josephine, lived in Danville. They started and were a big part in starting the very first high school, the very first post office. They were members of the very first church, which was the Presbyterian Church, which is now the town meeting hall here in Danville. That was originally the Presbyterian Church. Clarence and his wife started the very first fire district. So, do you know where Norm's restaurant is on Harts Avenue? That was the very first firehouse. Josephine was also very big in town. She helped before the high school was built in the two-story building that her father-in-law had built. On top was the school for a while, so a lot of the students who didn't go here went to school up there before the high school was built. So all these things happened, and they were, of course, very big in town. And where the fire station is now, uh, that's where the firemen would meet. And on Saturday nights, they'd play poker there. And Josephine didn't really have anything against poker, but there are some notes in the minutes from the fire district goes, well, Miss Josephine came by again last night complaining about the noise. She didn't care so much that we were having a drink or that we were playing poker, but it was keeping her awake and she had to get up and go to church on the next morning. And of course, they were living in the 10-room house that is where Bevmo is right now. So what's fascinating about all of that is that land where Bevmo is to this day still owned by the Close family and their relatives. Isn't that amazing? So Josephine also, and we were talking about this, Miss Charlotte couldn't vote. She also headed up the women's suffrage movement in Danville. And when California voted for the right for women to vote, she was big time in the valley in making sure that the vote got out. Danville, as it turns out, was not real progressive at the time. And so the vote was 48 against and 23 for allowing women to vote. Fortunately, the county went the other direction and the state went the other direction. So women did indeed get what they had always deserved, which was the right to vote here in California. The point all of it is that these people, you people, and everyone came here from someplace else and made this place the place it is today.